Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. I just sat in on a very long, only partially completed capital projects meeting. Were you listening?
Yes.
Morning, Tom. So a question, I hadn't been a participant in another meeting in a while. I noticed that I can see participants. Is that because I'm a panelist?
Yes.
But panelists can't, or attendees can't see other attendees?
Typically, yes.
Is there a way to change that?
I'm not sure. I'd have to play around with Zoom a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point, Summer, because I mean, you know, when you're in a normal meeting, you can look around the room and see who else is there and who's participating.
Right.
And when you're in Zoom, if you're not a panelist, you're in the anonymous mode.
Right, that's what I was thinking as I was listening to the mayor and city council meeting just now. I had no idea how many other attendees there were.
Yeah, I try to keep you guys in a heads up of, like, you know, if we've got, like, you know, like Brent is on now, Joe's listening. And then of course we just have members of the public. And Danielle said she wasn't able to attend this morning, so.
Right.
I'm glad Brent's here because I have a few questions for him at the appropriate time.
Okay, well, we'll just give it until 11 o'clock and then we can officially get going. Okay, so it's 11 o'clock. Last time we met, we were discussing potential changes to the redevelopment section of the sea level rise section of the resiliency code. I sent you guys out some of the comments about just some of the ideas I threw together about lot coverage. Did you guys get a chance to look at that? Have any questions, concerns?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead, Sumner.
Oh, I've got a bunch, so I'll go ahead, Tom. I mean, I'll throw something out there. First of all, I want to say thank you to Janelle for putting this together. I think the general question I have about the BMP piece that you have is, you know, I think we need to look carefully at where in the city the range of BMPs will work and where some will and some won't. And that gets to the questions I might pose to Brent at whatever time is appropriate. And then of course, there's the question of, well, you know, how do you quantify the effects, if you can, of the BMPs vis-a-vis having a 10%, you know, increase in impervious surface, but maybe I'm jumping the gun on all that.
So I guess my first question, and Janelle, you threw out some things exactly what we asked about and talked about last time. But the more I've thought about it, and in other discussions that we've had, I'm not sure under the sea level rise that this lot coverage is the right place for it, because it doesn't make any difference what type of impervious coverage you have necessarily with sea level rise and inundation. But the more specific concern is, if you look at our current code, our lot coverage is by zone. And it can go anywhere from, if I remember, 60 to 75% lot coverage, depending upon if you're in R4, R3, or commercial. And limiting lot coverage to 40% on an R4 lot of 5,000 square foot, I'm not sure that that's reasonable.
Well, again, the numbers were just put in there for discussion purposes. If you didn't
No,
like the 40%, you could go 45, 50, but typically we're allowing in most residential 50% for the house, and then we go up to 65% in residential districts for the rest of the items on the lot.
Yeah, I guess from an application perspective, my question is more, should it be one number, or just like we have in the code, where it's by zoning district, which takes into account lot size? Should it be an addendum to the table so that it's different for each of the zoning districts?
Okay, so Brent just chimed in that lot coverage percentage lends itself to a critical area sort of item, which you have with current zoning areas and could have plantings baked into the code as well. Ocean City were the forerunners with this, and it worked very well.
So Tom, I hear what you're saying, and I assume that the 40% figure that Janelle put up there was to reflect the need, particularly in, I would say, the beach area, of trying to reduce the flooding that we will likely have in the future. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's a great idea. I know it was something that was recommended in the KCI report, but as I've been suggesting on numerous occasions, when we get to a point where the groundwater is right there at the surface and the floodwaters are happening more frequently, we effectively have a totally impervious lot. I used to think, okay, that means we can't use it as infiltration, but we also want to restrict how much additional impervious surface is adding to a flooding problem. I'm assuming that's the point, the 40%.
Again,
try to reduce.
Most places I've worked in the past, their maximum lot coverage, even on like a smaller lot, is 35 to 40%. And that's a lot of municipalities that I've worked in the past. So again, I was just throwing that number out. It was just a starting off point for discussion. If you want to change it, that's up to you. We did get a comment from Joe saying forcing new residents to build tiny houses will raise the ire of neighbors concerned with lowering property values. And again, we're just looking at different ideas, just starting off with just something to get ideas talked about. I think, especially in this area, it's not a bad idea to start looking at that lot coverage, because we're already talking about the most critical areas regarding flooding, sea level rise, and I would think any little bit could be helpful to.
And I agree with you, Janelle.
Impact.
I agree with you on that. I mean, that was just looking at the grander scheme of things. And when you start talking about flooding, it takes into other sources. I think putting it here to start with, and then as we expand the resiliency portion, that's fine. And it's I'm not trying to pick the number that you put in there, suggested. I'm really more about thinking that I don't think a number works, because when I look at the code for limited commercial, the current lot coverage is 70%, and it goes all the way down to 60%, I think. Yeah, then it goes down to 65 for R3 and R2, and then 60% for R1. And I'm not sure that a one size fits all works.
So maybe you're getting at I mean, I assume the 40% reflected that sense that, it's a more restrictive number than what we have in place now. The idea is to reduce the amount of impervious coverage. perhaps it's a matter of saying when you have to rebuild, you rebuild at a reduced coverage by X percent, whatever that percentage is.
Well,
Right. And it's
or
also
we-
saying that you can build to a higher lot coverage, except for you have to put, if you want to do that, you're providing BMPs. So we're just saying the
I
base
I
is
agree with that. I guess my suggestion specifically is that we add to the tables an extra line that says maximum lot coverage for AE zones and put the number in there, and then we could put an asterisk on it that you get a 10% credit or whatever it is for the BMP as you're suggesting.
Regardless of redevelopment or general building.
Well,
I mean, this was in the context of redevelopment, correct?
yes. I mean, it could be for new development as well. I think it actually could work for both.
yeah, and nothing in the code is retroactive. So everything
Correct.
out there, it would only be if you're going to pull a building permit and add do redevelopment that the new line item in the code would be applicable.
Right. So if you want to leave, you know, the lot coverage at 50% and say you can go up to 60%, but you're going to provide 2 BMPs or 3 BMPs or however many, we could have that both redevelopment and new development.
I like the sound of it. I got to think it through, and some of my ultimate sort of belief in it depends on the question that I would ask, I guess, Brent, unless there are others on the call. And that has to do with, it's sort of getting on Brent's critical area thing. You know, I live down by the beach. I'm familiar with the beach. It may apply just as well in any of the other areas, but my sense is each of these different zones may very well, given their elevation differences, they may offer different subsets of that set of BMPs. Like just doing a little research on some of the things that you listed in there, and I know these were only examples, but the bio retention type stuff seems to require the same sort of headspace in terms of room above the water table that infiltration requires, namely 2 feet. So there are certain areas in the city where I think that's going to get hard to do. So, you know, in some areas, there will only be some of those BMPs that will be able to be used.
So Brent just said you just can't place BMPs anywhere. They have to meet design and site requirements.
Sorry, say that again?
He said BMPs need to meet design and site requirements.
Right, so I guess it gets to how we lay out that set of possibilities for, you know, what BMPs and what combination can be used to meet the 10% incentive. Don't know we're going to figure that out today, but I mean, I like the idea. I love the idea of incentivizing more responsible, environmentally sustainable, resilient approaches to building and site design. Of course, the other aspect is how are we going to know that we're getting what we hope for? For example, under, I don't remember what the thing was, it was like conservation landscaping or something like that. That's a big term.
So I'm going to tell you, I took the concepts. They were from the chart that we got from both the AECOM and the KCI report. I think they need some working and some refining to kind of come up with more examples, but that's what we had as a starting off point. So I figured we had some criteria, some categories, and some specifics, but I think there are more out there that we can use. So just something like that we can look at.
And along those lines, Janelle, I mean, the wording says 3 items from 2 or more categories, from at least 2 categories. I'm not sure what the categories are.
Okay, so the categories are the bioretention, the permeable pavement, the rooftop disconnect, the rainwater harvesting, because the examples are in the parentheses.
Don't we already require rooftop disconnect in parts of the city? I mean, what part of the city is actually supported by stormwater pipes?
Brent, do you have any idea?
Well, it is in code that you cannot put your downspouts into the storm, directly into the sewer system.
That's what I thought.
Other than that, I mean, you discharge onto the ground, and if it runs off into the curb, there's nothing in the code that disallows that.
But I didn't know what that meant, rooftop disconnect, other than what you just said, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, rooftop disconnect is one of those generic, you know, we 10 years or so ago changed the code to prevent people from dumping it into the sewer system, but we do allow for it to be discharged into the stormwater system.
So can I add a little bit to that? So the old code, if you were doing a commercial building, a lot of people would run downspouts down and then run a collector line to a stormwater pond. So it never really saw green grass. It went directly into the pond, was quote unquote treated, and then left the site. What this kind of provided was you disconnected it and it ran 100 feet to the stormwater pond, thus getting, in theory, a little bit of cleaning before it got in there. The rooftop disconnect is kind of a catch-all thing, and what it's basically done is eliminated underground stormwater piping. But the good thing that it's done is it doesn't inundate a system, because many people are just running an 8-inch line, and the downspouts would back up, and then you would end up with roofing issues or something like that, and you know, not even related to stormwater or nutrient removal. But it's almost everybody has a rooftop disconnect now. This kind of encourages it, but if you do the rooftop disconnect with a rain barrel, maybe that's a good terminology to use on that.
Yeah, and I'll get on my horse again. I really think rain barrels needs to come out of here. A 55-gallon rain barrel does essentially, I mean, it's great. It reduces our use of water for irrigation to a certain extent, but it does nothing for stormwater. I mean, that's a 10 by 10 roof with something like 1/4 of an inch of rain.
You need a lot of rain barrels.
Yeah. I mean, to me, if anything significant, you need a decent sized cistern to have it be meaningful. Rain barrels are one of those things that are a feel good, but not necessarily materially significant.
So in looking over all the materials that you put together for us, Janelle, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and this is the other question I wanted to ask Brent, and maybe Tom, you've got answers for this as well, is, you know, in an area like the beach, in any area where you have low elevation that is perhaps, well, is definitely already in the AE zone and is definitely going to be in the way of rising seas, you know, which of the array of stormwater practices really makes sense, where you really aren't going to have any kind of infiltration capability, and maybe you don't have any kind of stormwater infrastructure? What do you have left to do? How do we deal particularly with the beach area that is rooftop disconnect, and there are some pipes, but the pipes are getting, maybe I'm trying to solve a problem that needs to happen somewhere else, but I'm imagining that as through time with sea level rise, there will be more areas that will be in a situation where there is no room in the ground in the Veda zone. There is no unsaturated soil zone below a site, and it's flooded more often. How are we going to restrict what stormwater practices are used there? How do we incentivize other ways of building and designing sites and so on?
So try to figure out how to, so things are always changing. the ground's always changing, the groundwater is always changing, the sea level is always changing, the wind, the rain, the sites, home building. You know, people are looking at different structures now than they were 100 years ago. Groundwater fluctuates. You know, in 2005, when all the wells went dry in Wycomico County, you know, I was stuck putting a new well in 15 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, in 15 years, we've got high water table. It fluctuates, it changes. It's difficult to really apply a specific thing for future. So you can make it, if you apply these BMPs, and they may not work today, they might work in 15 years. The stormwater code might change in 10 years and allow different BMPs, or they may take them out completely. I've heard through the grapevine that they're looking at new stuff in Maryland and doing a completely different stormwater approach in Maryland, and typically Delaware slides in right behind Maryland does. Maybe that occurs, maybe it doesn't. You know, I like to say it rains differently now. We no longer get those gentle 1 inch over 24-hour rain events. We get 3 inches in 45 minutes and it's left standing around for 12 hours and then it goes away, and then the next day we get another one. So it's really hard to codify BMPs and what can be done and what can't be done. There may be an area along that beach where there's, I'm not going to call it a dune, but a high spot that's 3 feet higher than the neighbor, where that would actually work, but on the neighboring property it doesn't. You know, near the beach house, they've got some higher ground, but they're still in an AE zone. You go directly across the street and down 5 houses, there's 5 feet of difference. You know, which means that there's probably 4 feet of difference to groundwater at that point. So it's the best you can do is write the code well enough to allow things to possibly occur, but things that aren't going to function properly can't be done. It is my advice.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I asked the question. So you just say you leave the whole set open and it will be up to someone on a case-by-case, on a site-by-site basis to determine which of those will work on each site?
More or less, yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, I can't shove certain things into certain sites as an engineer. It's just not going to work. So they just immediately get checked off and you move on to the next one. If they don't work, you've made an allowance for it. If the next 10 years become a drought and it works for them, then maybe it's allowable in 10 years. It's, you know, it's, now you can pick and choose some things like the downspout disconnect thing, which is basically almost a requirement, other than, I mean, you could put in there a forgiveness for rain barrels or cisterns or anything like that, whatever you wanted to bake in there. But I mean, you can kind of pick and choose that, you know, a permeable driveway leading from the road to the house should almost be looked at anyway, but I'm not sure that I would give them like a 50% credit for that. I mean, and I know the numbers are preliminary and everything, but that's one of those things where you're taking what was pervious or impervious and turning it into pervious, which kind of should be looked at anyway. So that might be an easy one. You know, if you install a rain garden in the back, you know, I'll also forewarn you on that. If you install a rain garden in the back of the house before it runs off into the marshland and they sell the house, the new homeowner has to kind of be aware of what's going on. And that was one of the things that was really difficult in Maryland, is they were trying to make these, you know, subdivisions with every house had a rain garden. Well, when you turn it over, new Johnny homeowner comes and buys it. Well, what's that little wet spot in the back corner of my yard with some weeds growing out of it? I don't want that. So they've already gotten the credit for the extra building area, and then they take out the BMP. So
One of
that's,
my basic concerns is that through time, as the sea level rises, that there will be fewer BMPs from the whole set that will actually work there. Are there certain things that are activated at a higher water level, at a higher flooding frequency? You know, in a low slope, almost flat environment like we have, just in that area you described by the Children's Beach House?
there's something great that works fantastic, but it's the devil, is Phragmites. It will clean water like nobody's business, but it's invasive, it's nasty, it gets everywhere, it attracts bugs. But from a pure, to answer your direct question, it is the greatest thing in the world to clean water. Them and oysters would clean up everything in 2 years.
And
But
it's what, oh, go
you
ahead.
can't control it.
That brings me to another point that I thought of when I read through all the things that you put out there, Janelle, and that was, you know, things like living shorelines. How do we, and again, this is thinking maybe forward toward the new development stuff. How do we help to sort of build that, sort of raise the priority for things like that, anticipating just that kind of a phenomenon that Brent talked about? How do we build in more sort of roughness in the landscape, wave attenuation, biofiltration, and so on in a new development where there's going to be a long edge with water? I'm just, this is a placeholder. I'm just want to throw this out there.
Well, again, if we're talking about a long edge with water, it's probably going to be some type of wetlands that will have a buffer against it, hopefully soon. And I know you want a larger buffer and different things, but if we're looking at the redevelopment, we're looking at a house by house basis. And as Brent was saying, you know, it may work today, it may not work tomorrow, and there might actually be new BMPs, you know, in the future that we can add to the list. And, you know, ones that, you know, we recognize are outdated, we can remove. So again, with the code, you can always amend the code to make it something that, you know, is working for what you're looking at that time period. Right now, these are the best management practices that are out there that we know about. You know, if you don't like some of them, like the rain barrels, or you want to make sure the rain barrels is of a certain size, we can do that. Because I know there are larger rain barrels. Looking at different ways to, you know, make sure that people know, you know, what's going on, you know, when they sell their house. We could look at that. That's just always going to be difficulty. So Joe had a comment that living shorelines are to stop erosion, not holding back sea level rise or storm surge.
Brent, I'm curious what you think about that. I mean, I get where Joe's going, but my sense is in reading up on this over the last couple of days, it's a matter of increasing the roughness, increasing the ability to reduce the energy of the waves and so on. It may not be erosion so much as it sort of soaks up some of the flooding potential, and maybe I read it wrong.
Well, so there have been studies done from Sandy that areas that had a living shoreline rebounded back to close to pre-Sandy levels about 3 times quicker than hardened shorescapes, bulkheads and revetment and everything. It doesn't completely reduce everything, but it turns into that word sustainability and resilience, right? Which doesn't mean that everything is sustained at the same level forever. It just means that it doesn't get destroyed as badly as others, or it's able to bounce back to pre-X conditions in an easier manner. They're difficult at times, they're easy at times. You have to have the space for it. You have to have the community buy-in. On a lot by lot basis, they're going to save that lot until it gets high enough to overtop it, and then you're back in the same boat with everybody else at that point. Making a long stretch in a new subdivision, there may be a point in time where DenRec is actually moving in that direction. You know, I don't know if it's worth tackling now because it's such a big lift. Maybe it's one of these things, you get the basics of the sea level rise in, and then you can always build upon it. You know, kind of like I touched on the critical area thing.
Right, and we've
but-
left the ordinance open for an entire resiliency section. This
Right.
section of the resiliency ordinance is just focusing on how we're addressing sea level rise. So I think
Yeah,
there's
so-
a lot of other options that we can look at, you know, once, because I know in a couple months we're going to be meeting with the mitigation team and council, with the commission to go to discuss the resiliency options that were discussed at the last commission meeting.
Right. No, I believe in them. I believe if they're put in the right place, that they do work and provide great benefit. It's just a matter of getting them in the right area and quote unquote selling them.
Just a couple of thoughts. While we do have supposedly rooftop disconnect, if you walk around the town, you'll find that many of the downspouts actually go directly onto driveways, which go directly to the stormwater system. So, and that's a result of the fact that we have small lots and there isn't a lot of room to necessarily treat water on the lots. But we don't necessarily have the filtration or any type of break in many locations around the city. The second one is, and this goes back to why, and I'm totally okay leaving this section here for now, but if you look at the weather data, and the longest term weather data we have is from Harbison, we've had 4 10-year storms for rainfall in the last 10 years. And the probabilities of that being random occurrences is next to nothing. As a matter of fact, one of those storms was a fraction of an inch shy of a 500-year rainfall. So, yes, we did have a drought in the late 2000s, as Brett pointed out, and you know there was problems in the center of the peninsula with wells. Based upon the recent trending history, weather has changed for whatever reason, and the idea that we need to be planning for what the future weather will be. Now, once again, that's kind of outside the scope of sea level rise, but that has got to be one of the main things we take up in resiliency and flooding.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can, I mean, we're trying to look at this as a holistic, you know, approach, trying to make sure we're recognizing everything. So it sounds like we're good with the items I've put in there. It sounds like, you know, I'm going to tweak the percentage numbers. If you guys had feedback of like, you know, if you want more specifics, we can play with that. Do you want to continue discussing this one, or do you want to move on to next steps or new
Well,
development? Go ahead.
just to be clear, let's get agreement on. I think that the number should come out of the text and should be a row in table 197 attachment 3, so that it is zoning district specific.
So my concern there is it's going to be easier to administer if it's just a flat out number. Because if I've got to start looking in different places for information, then it's more likely it's going to get missed. But if I know you are subject to sea level rise, this is impacted by sea level rise. And again, we're just talking about the lots that are impacted by sea level rise. You know, if you want to leave them at like, you know, 55% and then up to 65%, I think the number needs to be in the sea level rise, and not messing with all the zoning districts,
Well,
because
I would,
it's all together in one section.
I would suggest, you know, my concern is the exact opposite of that, Janelle, is that if we have permissible lot coverage in a table, which has got all the other setbacks and everything else is where people are going to go, and then you put a different number in the body of an ordinance section, that you're now splitting. The whole purpose of the table was to collect everything about a zoning district and restrictions on building in one place.
Well, we can add a note to the table, because there's a lot of notes at the end of the table that says if you fall under the sea level rise, you need to follow the lot coverage follows that section of the code. And you know,
Is it worth just adding a column that basically lists out the sea level rise area? It basically becomes a special zoning area or a special district, whatever the right term is, maybe not zoning area.
we can look at it. I can take a look.
Yeah, I just take a look at, because to me, and if there's another way of doing it, I'm okay with it. To me, adding a additional row that was maximum lot coverage for AE zones, and then underneath, it would be under every zoning district, and we could put the appropriate number in each zoning district.
Yeah, I don't want to go by AE zone, because we've also got VE. And I think if we just leave it
Yeah.
all at the same, if you fall under sea level rise, this is your lot coverage percentage, because one, it's cleaner. So I'll take a look at how to make it look in the code.
Because-
I think we're going to have to reference it here, and then we can reference it in the table as well. So we've got it in two. I mean, in this case, it's not a bad idea to duplicate that in the code. So I will take a look at the
Janelle,
table.
Actually, that brings me to a question I found myself wondering when I was looking over this resiliency outline as it exists today. And I think what you've just been talking about gets right at it. If I understand what you're saying, everything you see in what we're discussing today, this draft resiliency outline and all the pieces of the resiliency ordinance, they key in on applicability in 197.73.1B1, which all says located within the floodplain. And this is the floodplain as it's defined in our code.
No, we don't define it in the code. We just, what the code references is the FEMA maps. So whenever those FEMA maps change, this code reflects the most current up-to-date FEMA maps. And that's how it will always be. So we don't need to reference that in the code, because we're referencing the floodplain as it exists. So as it changes over time, the code is still relevant to any future increases in the floodplain.
So it is a given that when you say a word floodplain with no other qualification, that it references the FEMA floodplain?
Yes, because the floodplain is defined by FEMA.
As long as it's capital F, capital P, and then it's a defined term.
Yeah, I guess that's my point, is I want to make sure that it actually, it's entirely clear that it means the current FEMA floodplain subject to revision as FEMA revises it.
Yeah, it is, because it's the only type of floodplain this city recognizes. We don't have floodplain outside of what FEMA has identified. We don't. Yeah, we only enforce what FEMA has identified.
Did we ever talk about the FRAM, flood avoidance stuff that the state's done through Executive Order 41? I don't remember if we ever talked about that. I was just looking at that map and what it does. and how it works relative to, I found myself realizing that the state's efforts in building that FRAM map are very similar to what we're trying to do with our 3-foot sea level rise work. I was just wondering if it would be simpler to tie in with that map. Do you know what I'm talking about?
For basis of
Uh,
identification
well-
of areas this would apply to, or?
Well, yeah, maybe I'll talk with you offline about
Okay.
this, but in particular, I would say under critical facilities, because the Executive Order 41 seems to be oriented toward the more critical facilities end of things. It gets at basically trying to build a future floodplain based on sea level rise, something that we haven't done explicitly. We assume that FEMA will update it periodically. Delaware's actually gone to the trouble of saying, here's the area where we think we need to be careful about placing things and doing things over the next 80 years.
Yeah, we can definitely discuss that. But I think right now, and I did check the reference in the floodplain section, and it references floodplains from PEMA maps. So we're good referencing, because again, it's still in that section of the code under the floodplain. So our resiliency section is actually under the environmental section, which is actually directly under floodplain. So I think we're good there.
I just
And
want
we
to come
can talk
back.
about the FRAM maps.
I just want to come back to the numbers discussion from a few minutes ago. I guess I haven't thought this all the way through, but I do kind of like the idea of referring to the numbers as percent reductions. You know, we'll incentivize a 10% reduction in cover from what you previously had before you redeveloped the property. I don't know what those numbers should be, but the idea is that we're working in the right direction in terms of reducing the impervious coverage on a given, or hopefully a whole bunch of lots through time. I mean, it seemed to me that was the whole point of the 40% number that you put out there in the first place.
Yeah, I just threw out 40% as just a starting point. I didn't think it was gonna, just to get discussion going. I did not think it was going to survive the subcommittee, because it is such a significant, change, but I figured let's at least talk about it. But yeah, I will play with all of that information and that data and kind of come back to it. So I will clean it up.
So then where are we in terms of all the stuff that's in gray on this outline? I mean,
So it sounds like you guys are okay with leaving the BMPs in, and I just need to tweak the 40% percentage requirements. And it sounds like, you said, you want the 40% to be a different number, or we're going to use, your lot coverage, but it's a reduction of 10%. And you have to do the BMPs. To me, that actually sounds more negative. If I was a homeowner going, well, I've already got 65% and I'm going down, instead of, hey, I get this, and then I'm incentivizing it. Like to go up, I'm incentivizing to go up instead of I'm incentivizing to go down. I think it's an easier thing for the public to like get on board with and go, oh, I don't have to, I don't know. It just, to me, the way my mindset works is you're incentivizing me to reduce something instead of saying, oh, I'm already at a level, but I get to go up if I do the incentives. Does that make sense?
I think so. Again, my basic issue with all the specifics on the BMPs are, I just don't know how many of those are going to work in certain sections of the city. And without the experience that Brent, for example, has, my worry is that through time, the number of possible choices in any one area will reduce. So, and then the other thing that, based on the conversation so far, I thought a really good point was made about the management of whatever BMPs are installed initially through time as properties transfer, how do we retain the functionality of those BMPs moving forward? I don't know if that's like a deed kind of a thing, a conservation easement or whatever you do. Seems to me we should be exploring something like that.
We can definitely look at that. I don't know about, I think certain ones we might be able to say they have to be in an easement. Putting on a deed restrictions, I mean, who follows up with that? You know, especially if you're just, you know, reconstructing, you know, who's going to really want to update their deed based on their rebuilding a house. But I think we might be able to do, we can look at an easement depending on what type of BMP they do.
And just one clerical thing, Janelle, I'd suggest the list of BMPs, you break out into, like the first one is labeled lowercase I point bioretention. I think we either follow that formatting so that it's clear what what each category is.
I'll list them out with the examples underneath.
Yeah.
I'll make it cleaner.
Yeah, just so that it's easier to read.
So I could add a little bit. I know the 40% seems small, but if you look at just structure as 40%, that would be, you know, 2,000 square feet on a 5,000 square foot lot. That would then, I'm not going to say require, but almost require permeable pavers on the driveway. And then any deck that's built on the back outside of that structure footprint would have to be pervious, which requires, you know, the half-inch or quarter-inch or half-inch spacing on the deck. And if you had a standard for that building design, then it doesn't seem quite as small. You know, you could put width of the deck on the back of the house out 10 feet, and you could set limits for the permeable constructed area. But that would give them a good size house, and then the driveway coming into the garage or front of the house, wherever, would be permeable by design, and it wouldn't encourage any more building on the lot. So you're not really restricting, you're not really giving any Scooby stacks out, but you're getting what you want at the end of the day with the permeable driveway and decks, and the impervious is still set. So right now you could do a 2,000 square foot house, but if you did a driveway and a little rain garden in the back, you might get a 3,000 square foot house in there, which kind of is backwards for what you're trying to, I mean, granted, you're giving them a Scooby snack, they're getting a bigger house and everything, but it also goes back into that character of the neighborhood type thing. You don't want them too small, you don't want them too big, you want everything to work together. You want the paver driveway, so you're getting the paver driveway without really giving anything up at the end of the day, and they're in the flood zone.
But there are many other things that go into lot coverage. For example, a swimming pool, a back patio, walkways, you know, we are going down from, you know, at the end of the day, everyone's going to see that 65 is what's written into the code for every place else. So, and I'm not sure you want to give 100% offset for the pervious driveway. I think most zoning places that I've seen that allow it give you like 50% reduction in lot cover of pervious coverage. Janelle, I know you had looked at once before, but in like the R4 zone, what is the average maximum lot coverage that we have currently.
So I was looking at duplexes and they
Oh,
were
that's-
all under 60%, but that's even for a duplex.
Mhm.
We were at 60, we were under 60%. I think the highest we got was 57 or 58%.
That's right. I remember that. I forgot what the purpose of.
We were looking at some lots that were 3,000, 4,000 square feet in size, and none of them got to 60% or 65%. They were all under 60%. So I think this is something that's definitely doable.
Mhm.
And especially if we start seeing houses being put on pilings, you know, that can open up a little bit of room for even more pervious underneath the house.
We have to, but we currently don't allow that, and
I
we
know.
don't have a P that says that. So I'm not opposed to it. I think if you direct your rain gutters underneath, if it's on pilings and it's sand underneath, that is pervious, but the current code does not support that.
Correct. The current definition of impervious does not support that, but I think that's something we can look at if you want to, or, you know, it's like, because I think right now we're just trying to figure out, we know the sea level is rising. We know we've got flooding issues in these areas, and, you know, we've got really high lot coverages. So how do we put in BMPs to help reduce the impacts from sea level rise? You know, and I think that's what the intent of this is the more lot coverage, the more impacts from sea level rise. The less lot coverage with BMPs, it's not a perfect fix, but it's going to do more than right now. You can cover 65% of your lot with impervious surface,
Mhm.
especially
Right, as
in that
we learned-
critical area of sea level rise.
And as we learned from the Delaware Geological Survey, in these areas where the sea level is rising, the areas closest to the water, the groundwater is rising as well. So we're losing that much capability to do, at least for some of the areas, what I think, Janelle, you were just suggesting with houses on pilings. There will come a time when there won't be room in the soil for the water that you might tuck under the house. But yeah, I mean, I agree with your general goal of reducing the lot level imperviousness. I get that. I very much support that. But I just worry about how we handle different areas of the city. Some of them are going to be more susceptible to this. You know, they're going to have different sensitivities, different opportunities in terms of being able to process certain volumes of stormwater per unit time, you know, moving forward.
I think right now, you know, we don't have the perfect answer, but I think we have a really good answer just to start, you know, having that conversation, getting something into the code to see what starts to work and what doesn't, because when we start realizing, well, that's not going to work here, you know, and they come meet with Rob and Henry and myself, you know, when they're in that area, and we can kind of go, okay, this isn't working. But again, like Brent said, it might work at one house, but 3 houses down, it's not going to work. So it's going to be maybe, I mean, we're going to do our best right now to get the best BMPs that we know. And sometimes it's going to be hit and miss. Sometimes it's going to work great, and sometimes it might not work great. But it's an attempt to do something to help further the impacts of sea level rise. Okay, so what I've got is I'm going to work with the number, put the items in a list format, look at putting it to the table at the end. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about today? Do we want to start getting into new development? Or do we want to start talking about next steps? Because the last time we met, we were thinking about having this go to the commission in September. What are you guys thinking? Are you think it's ready to go for just a discussion at the commission level?
What else is on the agenda for September, Janelle? Do you know yet?
A decision on floodplain fill.
Right.
More discussion on 5G. Review of the bylaws and minutes. So there's no new business on the agenda.
We don't have any applications coming back?
There are no applications. So is this something you'd like me to add on the agenda for, discussion? I can clean it up, get it back out to you guys by the end of the week in a list format and some of the things we discussed, just to, if you want, or do you want to keep working?
No, I do not want to proceed to subdevelopment until we get some feedback from
Okay.
the larger LPC on where we're at now.
So
So,
really, we're checking in with the planning commission as a whole.
well,
Yes.
sharing the draft we have, and this way we can have a discussion amongst the, I guess, 7 of us now,
Yeah.
dropping like flies.
Okay,
I think it's time.
All right. So I will bring that up on our agenda meeting on Monday. Is there anything else you guys want to start talking about today? Any updates on the workshop? I think it's the water workshop 2 or 3 now that Tom you've been working on.
I'm waiting for, and Jake, you did get the information I sent you, didn't you?
I got some information, yeah.
And Mike Powell was going to get back to me with thoughts from DENREC. And then I think at that point, we can start looking at calendars and deciding when to do this.
Okay, because I'm guessing you're looking like late October, early November, because September's coming up fast, and we've got that joint committee meeting in October on October 1st.
Right, and so we have a lot going on at that point.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things going on at the county level also. So let's you and I talk offline about
Perfect.
scheduling date on there.
Just
All right.
a question about that workshop. Given what we learned in the planning commission about this October 1 meeting, is there utility in having the workshop before the joint session with the litigation team?
I'm not sure, because I think you're going to get some of the same information.
It just seems that session, that October 1 session, seems like there's a lot to possibly discuss.
Yeah, there is.
And I'm a little concerned that and maybe that's the design, is we're just going to start a dialogue and we're going to have to get on a regular schedule of
But
a dialogue of however that's going to roll out. But
part of that October meeting, Sumner, is to decide who's going to take the lead on some of these items, whether it's mitigation task force or planning commission.
But I guess that's why I ask, would it help? Maybe I don't really know what it is that you've got in your mind for this next workshop. It seems to me that workshop could lead rather nicely into the dialogue between planning and mitigation planning.
Well, the mitigation is going to be an internal Lewis thing. It's really between mayor, city council, mitigation, and planning commission. And it's to kind of lay out a roadmap of who's going to take the lead and prioritizing areas. The workshop, just like we did when Kate put on the 2 water workshops, reaching to the Sea Grant, DENREC, Sussex County Planning, external agencies to come and really, present information. And I'll share with you what I have so far, Sumner.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and just double copy me, because just so I make sure I have it. And I do know for the October 1st, they were looking at having members from DENREC and Sea Grant and a couple other agencies come and give presentations. They were working at a lot of things out. So I think a lot of things are still moving and in progress, and we will see how they turn out soon. Hopefully we'll have everything together.
We had, you referenced Janelle that Danielle couldn't make it today. One of the things that I've been wondering about over the last several months is why we don't have more experts on these actual committees. Brent has been carrying a great load, and I very much appreciate all the great input that Brent's provided.
So
Is there a
we've
way
reached,
of bringing in some of these other people as part of the committee?
that's up to you guys.
I mean, we have right down the road at the university some amazing resources.
Absolutely, and we've got some, I know I've reached out to DENREC a few times, and they try to listen in when they can, because it's not always possible. You know, they've got other stuff going on. But they do try, and they've also provided me a lot of information, which is why I've come up with some of the ideas. They've given me a lot of data and a lot of reports that I've been going over, and I reach out to them when I have questions. So they have been very helpful to provide, when I have a question, data and information. And I know they've attended as participants in several of the meetings.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, do we want to schedule a next meeting, or do we want to wait until after Planning Commission?
No, I think we should, so we said we're going to present that September.
Mm-hmm.
So we should have a meeting before then.
Okay.
Make sure that we're on the same page amongst us. Don't you think?
Sure.
Yeah.
So September 9th, it's a week before the commission meeting. And it's 2 weeks from today.
Bear with me 1 second.
I think that's a good suggestion. I can do that.
And does 11 o'clock work? I know you're still looking, Tom.
That's for me.
Yeah, that works. I've got a DMAC meeting in the afternoon, but 11 works in the morning.
September 9th at 11. And I will get that set up and scheduled. Do you guys have anything else?
No, not right at this
I'm
point.
sure I could dream up a million things, but I'll say no, thank you.
Okay, and if you guys need to talk, you mentioned both talking to me offline, just give me a call or send me an email and we'll talk.
All right.
All right,
Thank
everybody
you.
have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.